Yes, I'm outside. Yes, I'm wearing fake glasses. And yes, I am that serious. Let's talk about a story from the past. See, the world of hip hop would drastically change over the course of a single night. Now, no one died or was shot, but hip hop would never be the same again. See, on August 3rd, 1995, at the Paramount Theater in Madison Square Garden, New York City, the hip hop heavyweights would converge for what would be an unforgettable night. Now, the events of that evening are responsible for the extreme shift the hip hop culture would undergo on its way to music supremacy. Those awards would see the West Coast East Coast rivalry go from wax to lead. The purists would see the rise of commercial rap, and Atlanta would put in overtime to dethrone all other regions to control hip hop. Yes, I'm outside. Yes, I'm wearing fake glasses. And yes, I am that serious. Yes, I'm outside. Yes, I'm wearing fake glasses. And yes, I am that serious. Today, we're telling the tale of the 1995 Source Awards. Very interesting event. Now, again, like I said in the intro, that night literally would change hip hop forever. After that night, hip hop would never actually be the same again. In 1995, New York was not only the birthplace of hip hop, but it was the reigning, defending champions. Puff Daddy, known today as Diddy, and his Royal Brigade of bad boys were in the middle of a war with Suge Knight and his Gangster Death Row Records. On this night, both sides would fail to realize the real threat that was the new movement bubbling up from the South. Atlanta was about to put hip-hop in a stranglehold. Like one of these. Like that kind of stranglehold. That stranglehold still thrives to this day. When Outkast were confusedly booed after winning the award for Best New Artist, it was a night to remember. One that has the distinction of being the night that hip-hop changed forever. Now let's talk about the source real quick. First, you must understand that hip-hop was extremely regional. We didn't have social media yet. Barely was breaking news at the time. To put it into a timeline perspective, this was the earliest stages of the 24-hour news cycle. See, because the O.J. Simpson case had made it so where the coverage 24/7 was necessary. Now, that O.J. case was reaching its pinnacle at the time this Source Award happened, so we're not living in the modern 24/7 news cycle that we know today in 2022. Magazines were the main source of any kind of information about things that you would consider genre, right? So music, video games, lifestyle, they had some of the biggest magazines on the planet. In 1988, though, besides being the year that my wife was born, which to me is a very important day, David Mays, a white guy who graduated from Harvard, would start The Source, a magazine specifically for the hip-hop culture. The Source magazine would grow from a regional newsletter to a mainstream market publication. Not a small feat by any stretch of the imagination. And today, it is still one of the longest running rap periodicals on the market. The Source magazine would be known for several reoccurring columns. They had an unsigned hype where they would showcase the up and coming talent of rap. They had its mic rating system, where you would go from 0 to 5 mics, and 5 mics would basically mean that it's a classic album. I think on the original release, I think they only had 15 albums that went 5 mics. I think they've retrograded some now, but at the time, there was only, I think, 14 5 mic albums. Could be wrong. That 5 mics thing would be 5 mics became a sought after achievement for those looking to be a great, right? The rating would kind of be tarnished later on in its bias against Eminem. But honestly, that's a story for a whole nother video. I could literally do an hour video on just that issue that happened there. The Source magazine would continue to revolutionize ways to promote hip-hop. It would put out its own compilation albums, 13 to be exact. They would also want to give hip-hop a new way to, like, garner some respect from the industry. And so they created the Source Awards. Hip-hop was a kind of running joke among mainstream music, from its silly aesthetics to the hardcore lyrics. Most people felt there was no place in music, in the music industry, for rap. And that's unfortunate, because even now, if you look, it's the largest growing music genre on the planet. Even back then, though, the Grammys wouldn't even recognize, they wouldn't televise the rap category. Will Smith and Jazzy Jeff, the Fresh Prince himself, literally boycotted the 1989 Grammy Awards because they just didn't like the respect they were given. They, of course, win the award, but they're not there to accept it because they just don't like the idea of hip-hop being shunned. At the time, it was, I think the quote was, we could only put the 16 top categories on television. And, you know, how rap wasn't one of those 16 top categories is kind of amazing, seeing as that guys like Will Smith had been leading the charts for a long time. Now, the Source Awards, the people who ran the Source Awards decided they were just going to take the matter into their own hands and just be done with all the Grammy stuff and all these other people not giving them the respect. So in 1991, the Source would go and give out trophies on the ever popular Yo MTV Raps. That wouldn't be enough, though, because hip-hop, again, is a growing and expanding industry that is leading the way in consumer purchase at the time, and it's tough. Now, by 94, the Source would put on a full-blown award show, complete with host and performances. Now, when the Source Awards would come together a year later to celebrate hip-hop, the environment of hip-hop would be extremely different. Everyone in attendance that night would say that the tension was palpable. No one going into that evening would understand the lasting impact of the events that would unfold in the hours to come. The West Coast had just taken control of hip-hop, which New York had dominated since the creation of hip-hop. And unlike today, there wasn't an endless supply of ravenous fans. The buying market was very limited. So naturally, that meant that it was a tooth and nail fight for the little airplay or the shelf space available. Right now, go on your favorite streaming app. Seriously, just pull it up on your phone. Scroll to the rap section and just give it a couple flicks. That thing will go on forever. You will just see artists you've never heard of putting out rap music. Drake will have 307 singles on the air or on the charts this year alone. That was probably more than every rap song that had been created by 1990. It's kind of hard to believe today, but you could have theoretically listened to every rap song ever made. New York is the birthplace of hip hop. That is not up for debate. That is a fact. Hip hop was born in a park on a bench. That's just facts. But California is probably where hip hop learned to drive. Or better yet, drive by. See, New York was the epicenter of every evolution of hip hop, from disco rap with African Bambaataa to the show of poverty represented by Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, his song The Message. By the time Big Daddy Kane was destroying wax, New York assumed it would control hip hop forever. That would all change with Eazy's Boys in the Hood. That song would kick off gangster rap. Now look, I could do a full video on the actual birth of gangster rap because you'd be shocked that it came from Philly, not the West Coast. I know everybody thinks it was the West Coast, and again, the Philly guys were putting out the songs. Ice-T was then mimicking that style, and it was blowing up. Eazy-E's Boys in the Hood was probably the first commercial gangster rap song. So while it isn't the first and it isn't the one that kicked off the gangster rap movement, for this specific discussion though, we will consider that patient zero for gangster rap. That song would kick off the gangster rap era, like I said. But New York would continue to go blow for blow with everybody. From the West Coast to even, at the time, Houston had a bubbling scene that was kind of coming up with Scarface and a few other artists. We'll just throw in a little side note that while all this is happening, there's a young man standing on a street corner somewhere in New York selling drugs and rapping his ass off. Keep that in mind. We'll come back to that in just a little bit. Eazy-E would be the first of many West Coast artists to take the lead of hip-hop. Ice-T would show how cool pimpin' could be, NWA was fighting back against police brutality, and Snoop was a smooth-talking, blue flag-wearing wonder kid. Tupac was a backup dancer at this point, but he had something to prove. And Dr. Dre, of course, would provide the soundtrack for the 90s and basically create how you make hip-hop music. The West Coast was clearly in control in the early 90s. It was their market. They were controlling what was being played on the airwaves. Remember that kid I was talking about rapping on the street corner? Yeah. Well, a try-hard record executive by the name of Sean Puff Daddy Combs would strap a rocket to that notoriously big back and try to fight to take back hip-hop from the West. Now, both sides would start off kind of in a respectful back-and-forth rivalry, but after a botched robbery in New York that left Tupac full of bullet holes, and again, that's a story for a whole different thing because you're going to find that it was totally different. But that's a story for a whole different thing. The people involved who Tupac blamed were not necessarily Biggie. I won't go into it because there's some that's a real good story, and we'll get to that to another. We can do that another time. All the while, now, while all of this is going on, the bickering back and forth between the West Coast and the East Coast, it's just starting. It's bubbling. It's not even like a real threat yet. While they were distracted, these two very young kids, fresh out of high school from Atlanta, they would be doing something that kind of makes hip-hop what it is today. And that is, of course, Outkast. And they would go on to put out their debut album, Southern Playalistic Cadillac Music. One word. Look it up. Going unnoticed by just about everyone involved in the East Coast-West Coast war, except P. Diddy. Puff Daddy did shoot a music video for Players Ball for Outkast because he just knew. But again, he took his eyes off the prize and was focused on the West Coast war. That single focus, though, would lead to the West Coast, East Coast both being caught off guard by the impending onslaught from the South. Now, the 1995 Source Awards were stricken with quite a few controversies, some more so than others. Let's talk about some of those controversies. The first major event would take place in the crowd as they were sitting the seats. A scuffle would break out between the two entourages of the West Coast and the East Coast. Now, of course, that increases the animosity in the area. The room is already tense. Now we've got a fight. Now people are escalating, and now people are starting to take the stage, and not in a violent manner, but just now coming onto the stage to put the show on. And you know, it was just an interesting thing. And so Suge Knight was the first to reach the stage, and he was up there accepting the award for Soundtrack of the Year. With mic in hand, Suge Knight would utter those now infamous lines. The New York crowd did not need that spelled out to them that he was disrespecting Diddy, and they booed accordingly. Within 5 years of those fabled Source Awards, the South would be the king's chart. The New York crowd didn't need it spelled out for them. They knew he was being disrespectful to Puff Daddy. So they booed accordingly. And that was the first official shot in the deadly East Coast, West Coast tragedy. The tough crowd of New York would continue to boo just about everyone that evening. Next up to face that booing crowd was Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg. Dre was receiving a Producer of the Year award. Snoop was there for moral support or backup, whichever was needed. Snoop and Dre had been leading the airwaves, like they had literally dominated radio since Dre put out The Chronic. And so it really wasn't all that shocking when Snoop was not pleased by being booed. And he had this to say. Now, Puff, who is a clever man, said during his Bad Boy performance, "I live in the East, I'm going to die in the East." And honestly, that was a very ominous statement in hindsight, because just a year later, he would lose Biggie Smalls on the West Coast, even though he was born in the East. Diddy could not allow everyone to get on stage with an open mic and disrespect him in his own city. So, while presenting an award, Puff took the opportunity to speak up, saying, "I'm the executive producer a comment was made about a little bit earlier. But check this out. Contrary to what other people may feel, I would like to say that I am very proud of Dr. Dre, of Death Row, and Suge Knight for their accomplishments. All this East and West, that needs to stop." That, of course, was not enough for the bloodthirsty New York crowd that night. The New York audience would then turn on Outkast next, with a confused crowd booing the unknown Best New Artist award winners. It wasn't exactly shocking turn of events. New York didn't really think the South was worthy of any positive attention. With our distinct dialects and our regional slang, it wasn't seen as an intelligent version of rap. It was kind of a silly fad akin to rap songs heard on Sesame Street. Andre 3000, though, he was not pleased with the reception that he was not pleased with the reception, chastising the crowd in attendance by telling them, "I'm tired of folks. You know what I'm saying? Closed-minded folks. It's like we got a demo tape and nobody want to hear it. But it's like this. The South got something to say. And that's all I got to say." And the South, without a shadow of a doubt, did have something to say. Now you're sitting there thinking, seems like a normal night in music. Well, how can this be considered the night that hip-hop changed forever? Well, it's the events that happened leading after the fact. It's the things that this entire award show kind of kicked off and started into motion. Soon after the awards, Suge Knight would bail Tupac out of jail, releasing the West Coast lyrical warlord. He would immediately start taking shots at Big and Puff. He was blindly going after them, assuming that they had something to do with his shooting, like with him getting shot. Of course, as history has told us now, Biggie and Puff had nothing to do with that, and there was a lot of other street drama involved. Snoop would have his trailer shot up while filming his song New York, New York. Capone, Noriega, Mobb Deep, Tragedy Gaddafi, they would record a song called L.A. L.A. Dre and Snoop, they would see the writing on the wall and just know that the death row is not where they wanted to be, and so within a year of the Source Awards, both of them would be gone from Death Row Records. Tupac would be killed leaving a Mike Tyson fight in Las Vegas. And Biggie would die 6 months later, leaving a party in L.A. Remember earlier when I said that it was kind of ominous of Diddy to say, I live in the East, I'm going to die in the East. And then he lost Biggie on the West. And it was a sad day for music. It was a sad day for everybody. Two men lost their lives over something that probably had nothing to do with either of them. That night, though, is also said to have given birth to the Escobar era of Nas. He was in attendance that night in the Source Awards, and he had just put out what most consider one of the greatest albums in hip-hop history, Illmatic. And do you think he got any awards? Nope. He was shunned to the side for all the commercial rap. And he vowed that night, supposedly, I don't know, I'm not in Nas's head, but Questlove has said that he watched his soul leave his body that night. And that night, Nas decided he would become a commercial rap star, trying to capitalize on some of the recognition that his peers were getting. Of course, tragically, that would never become the case because Nas, still to this day, does not get the respect he is deserved. Everybody praises Jay and all this for being the king of New York and this, that, and the other. But to me, it has always been Nas. Nas is a better rapper, bigger powerhouse. He has something actually to say, instead of just rapping about nonsense like Jay. Within 5 years of those fabled Source Awards, the South would control every chart on the planet. So that night was both the beginning and the end of the golden era of hip-hop. The artists that graced that stage that night are now the legends we still worship today. From Biggie to Outkast to Puff to Nas to Questlove, everybody. The hip-hop gods were on hand to witness what has been described as the death of hip-hop. Now, given where hip-hop is today, I can't say that was the death of hip-hop. You could argue that it was the death of a certain style of hip-hop. It is hard to imagine that an event that only lasted a few hours would have a decades-long impact. 27 years later, and it still is affecting the way music is produced and consumed today. To me, the funniest part of the event, it was meant to make the Source a bigger platform. But it actually kind of had the opposite effect. It sort of tarnished them. But also, it gave the music industry an idea that hip-hop is financially viable. And so that night, with a packed Paramount Theater in Madison Square Garden, they realized there is dollars to be had in rap music. Now, obviously, again, rap music had been dominating the charts, but it was a handful of artists. This was the time to show that it's actually an entire culture. There's quite a bit of artists, quite a bit of people involved in what you would consider rap music. I'll be honest with you. I think Rap music is the greatest music that's ever been created. It gives a voice to the voiceless. It gives people power. While all the artists involved in hip hop are pretty much unaffected today by the wild evenings like that one in 1995, the professional world of music, it was not. It did not like the way things went down that night. So they would just go on to fund their own award shows from this point on to keep all that chaos from happening. And of course, with hip hop, chaos is always just 1 second away. Everything that had transpired from the events of that 1995 Source Awards would take New York over 20 years to come back from. Seriously, over 20 years, hip hop did not have a mainstay New York presence. Till Nicki Minaj came along, I think New York was left out of the front spots of music for a long time. Now, there was occasions where they would get blips, where they would tease to come in. Obviously, Jay-Z never goes anywhere, but to be considered a New York rapper, he is rap. So I don't know. In the discussions of discussions, he's usually not linked to a New York rapper. New York was the gatekeepers of hip hop up to that point, and for good reason. They literally created all of it. But hip hop was a culture for the voiceless and a cultureless youth. The problem is, those aren't exclusive life experiences to New York. People from all over the planet have something to say over a bass-heavy beat. Hip hop was for all, and the Source Awards proved it that night. History can't be lost to time if we discuss it. So that's my plan. That's my goal, is to continue discussing these ancient hip-hop histories that maybe don't go unnoticed. So, in 1995, at the Paramount Theater, Madison Square Garden, hip-hop would change forever. Anyways, yes, I'm outside. Yes, I'm wearing fake glasses. And yes, that was some serious content. Go ahead, leave a comment down below if you got any interesting, cool stories you've heard of in music history that maybe I could do a little research on and maybe I could do a full video about. Anyways, you can catch me Monday, Wednesday, Friday live on twitch.tv/justthatserious, where sometimes I talk about music, sometimes I talk about sports, but I'm always getting my ass kicked in video games. I'm out.